It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, open relationships, swinging, and how you can have secure and sexy relationships, no matter how you do them. Now here's your hosts, Tara and Andre.
Hey, Andre.
Hey, Tara.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast. I am Tara Lynn Franco. I am a relationship and awesomeness coach.
And I'm André Turcotte. I'm a sex-positive psychotherapist.
And we're the co-founders of the Let's Talk Polyamory community on Facebook. You may also know us because we are the co-creators of the Polyamory's digital course. And our passion is to help people create awesome, sexy, secure, non-monogamous relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
We do have a passion about it. We do like doing that. Yes.
And so today's episode is a much requested topic on time management in non-monogamy.
Crazy, right? Who would think that would be such a thing? Years ago, before really being into it as we are now, I don't think it would have been on my radar to think, well, how is that going to affect my time management? Will I have enough time? And all those other considerations. Will my partners have time? All those things. But we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that was on my radar, but I think other than jealousy, which I think is one of the reasons people say they can't be non-monogamous, some people said, like, how do you actually have the time? So they listed as the number 2 reason why they might not want to even consider being non-monogamous. And it's one of the things also that our listeners tell us is an ongoing issue that they have to work on, is balancing time between partners.
You know, it's interesting that we talk about time, because in therapy, it's often said that time and money are the 2 greatest resistance that we have to overcome. People say, well, I'm just too busy right now. I won't be able to do it. And that's, but this is something, maybe looking at therapy might be kind of like a thing that you want, or maybe it's a bit of a chore, but this is the invitation to polyamory. How can we not make time for this, right? I mean, you would think that it would be prioritized or something that you'd want to go to, but yet there is the consideration of time management and how is it going to allow for this? Or do we feel bad when we have to maybe say no?
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that people do have a hard time, is saying no. And so we're going to talk all about those things. So in this episode, we're going to cover what is time management generally and why is it important, why time management can become an issue when you're dating multiple partners, strategies and tools for scheduling and managing time, and as well how to avoid polysaturation and overscheduling, and then our very own not to do list for time management. So awesome. So why is time management important? Okay, so we put this in and it seems obvious that we have to manage our time, and time is finite and that sort of thing. And as adults, we spend a lot of our time managing our time. But I was reading an article from Sarah Zoloff about what is time management and why is it important. And time management is a skill, and it's something that we need to develop in order to allocate our available time to accomplish tasks and achieve goals.
So even if we're not proficient in it yet, even if we don't feel as though we have great skills in time management, because it's a skill, it means that it's something that we can hone, we can work towards it, and we can develop it, make it better.
Yeah, I don't know if you have people in your lives that always say, when you ask them how they are, they say they're busy. And so there's kind of this busy hustle energy, I think we've got into as a society, because there's so many options available to us. And so effective time management is planning, prioritizing, organizing, and sometimes even controlling the way you use your time. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's 2 sides to it, right? You could be the one who is busy, or you could be less busy. And then when you go to invite people, they might be busy. And then do we personalize that? Do we think, oh, they're too busy for me? Or are we able to recognize, well, they're just busy and we'll have to find places and ways to it?
And then the other interesting thing about time management is that when we think about it, it's about maximizing our productivity and minimizing wasted hours. And I think this idea of wasted hours is kind of where we can get in trouble. What is considered a wasted hour? Like if you're not actually doing something,
I'm smiling because I'm thinking about often, well, I'll use
You're going to use me as an example.
Well, the 2 of us, I know that you appreciate when I plan things for our dates. And I wonder if you ever feel, if we do nothing, if that feels like it's a wasted time. But because of that planning, sometimes I feel as though, well, I have to come up with something, because I might be perfectly okay just hanging, just kicking it. You might prefer that we do have something planned, and then we have to schedule that time and all that good stuff. But it's interesting to think in that idea, is it productive time? Are we going to have a date? Is it well planned? And my partner might appreciate that, but maybe I'm more okay with it not being so.
Yeah, so that's definitely something people have to navigate, especially if they're introducing new partners. So we're going to talk about some strategies around that.
Do we also talk about the allowance for spontaneity? Because
Yes,
everything's planned
we do.
out. That's right. Okay.
Of course. Well, that's the one of the hazards of people getting too involved in time management is like you see people open their schedules and there's layers and layers of things. I think about when we talk to your accountant, for example, and having a hard time managing his time because people are booking things overlapping. And when he opened his schedule that one day, I was like, whoa, that is too much.
But that's an interesting point. It's too much. So initially, my type of character would be, well, I feel overwhelmed by all these demands. So I will naturally want to retreat and say, it's just too much. And you know what? I'm going to kind of pull back from it. And then maybe I miss these opportunities, as opposed to feeling as though, well, it does seem like a lot, but there are things that I can do to kind of regulate it. I can organize it. I can make it feel as though it's not so overwhelming.
Yeah. And to go back to your point on like planning things versus just having more chill time is I do value our chill time as well. I think part of it is wanting someone to want to plan something as well. So it's a bit of a balance. And that's why it's important to understand all your partner's desires and wants and to communicate yours, which we'll talk about. So we talked a bit about prioritizing rest and self-care and downtime. So that's important part of time management. And this idea that resting, and I have to talk to this with my clients a lot of times, is resting actually equals being more productive in some cases.
That immediately makes me think about how we're looking at napping as being beneficial, whereas once upon a time, I think it was often considered that, well, if you're going to take a nap in the middle of the day, it's because you are lazy. And yet there's a lot of empirical evidence to support the idea that our productivity actually goes up after a nap. But what's also interesting in this idea of self-care and downtime is, do I permit myself to have this? So there's a question of taking this self-care, taking this self-preservation, but in doing so, do I feel as though I'm being selfish, or is it to support myself so I can also avail myself to other people as well?
Yeah, I think I struggle with that sometimes. You've really taught me a lot in terms of the importance of rest and taking time and that sort of thing. We planned and hosted a party Saturday night, and we did a lot of work and getting ready for it. But at one point you were like, okay, we need to take a nap because it's going to be a late night and let's try to rest. And you encouraged me, even though I was very antsy, to, even if I don't sleep, just to take the time to like rest. So it's important. Those are important.
Yeah, I think taking time off and resting, that's like my forte.
That's why we have a good yin and yang thing. Okay, so let's go into how people end up struggling with time management in non-monogamy or polyamory. So the first thing is, which you alluded to, is that idea of new relationship energy and the poly buffet effect.
Well, we'll take the couple who've been rather close for a while, right? They might be in a monogamous relationship and then decide to open this up. And all of a sudden, they walk into this restaurant and there's a buffet, a smorgasbord of all these wonderful, tempting treats. And you just, well, where do I start? I want to go at it. And maybe those fantasies, those desires don't necessarily fit in the practical, the concrete part. And now we have to figure out how are we going to go about managing this. And there's our own desires, but then if we're partnered, well, we have to consider how it's going to land with them as well.
Yeah, because it's super exciting. I remember at the beginning, we did say yes to a lot of things. And I think that's the thing that people get into, is that idea of saying yes before realizing that you're overbooked.
As you say, that overbooked, I wonder what happens in being polyamorous if we double book and then, we're not aware of it. Maybe we're not using a calendar. And now we've committed to have dates with two people at the same time. But being polyamorous, could we invite them to meet each other and say, well, all of a sudden now we have a threesome?
I think you said, and I found this out more recently, on our first date, you actually had planned another date. I mean, we weren't dating, it was the first date, but we'd planned a date right after that. So you were layering some dates in.
Well, sometimes, in my defense, and it's possible that I did that, but maybe because we're talking about time management, maybe it was, well, okay, we'll meet with you on a first date from this time to this time, and then I'll go on my other date just because it is more practical that way. But I wonder if it feels conniving in any way. It's like, wow, this guy had something else lined up, and or we lingered on the corner for a while. I wonder if I was at that time thinking, well, I better kind of wrap this up because I need to get on to the next one.
Well, in some ways it is an efficient way to do it, right? And, it's nice to have the first date be kind of short. And so maybe it's easier to say like, okay, this is my this Saturday, I'm going to have a couple of coffee dates and meet different people. It is a way of managing your time. As long as people know that expectation, like I can meet you for an hour for coffee or something like that, I think is helpful.
But yeah, from a practical standpoint, if we have other commitments and we got a loving, supportive partner who says, yeah, okay, you take that afternoon, go do your thing. And then that's our window and we can kind of, regulate it that way.
So one of the other reasons people get into this time management issue is the FOMO, so the fear of missing out. So sometimes it's seeing other people who are non-monogamous, who are dating all kinds of people and have a full calendar, and you might feel like you should have like a full calendar. I think about sometimes recently dating and meeting other people hasn't been a priority for me, and so I'm not doing that. But I still identify as non-monogamous. So do I feel like I should be dating multiple people if I've declared myself as non-monogamous?
Are you matching your own expectations? Do you feel as though you have to be out there doing those things?
Sometimes I think people can get into a situation where they wonder that. And, I've certainly wondered that, but I'm fine with what I'm doing because what's important to me now is what's important to me now. And we're going to talk a bit about that later, but sometimes people feel like they're missing out. They're missing out on potential deep connections. Like if you're on the app and chatting with a few people, you're like, well, that person might be a really great person, or that person might be, and you don't want to miss out on an opportunity because, these things happen, like dating apps, people like move on, right?
Yeah. No, I just had a vision. I'm full of it today, obviously, well, more than usual, perhaps. But I was just thinking about being almost like the fish in the water, and you see a school of fish in front of you, and there's so many different choices, and you're overwhelmed. You don't know which one to go for, and you kind of go for all of them, but then get none of them. So maybe, you have to be able to kind of prioritize, regulate, figure out which ones you're wanting to go to. But it's happened where there's been more than one event going on at the same time. And how are we going to figure it out? And are we wanting to sample a little bit of each one and say, well, from 8 to 8:02, we'll be at this party, and then from 8:02 to 8:07, we'll be there, and, or do we just come to the idea of, well, maybe we can't do all of this, and what really resonates with me? What is it that I'm actually wanting to get out of this evening? Yeah.
You reminded me of the Halloween, not this Halloween, but the previous Halloween, where I think we went to 2 parties in one night, and we had like multiple weekends of Halloween parties. Now that is our Christmas Halloween. So it was awesome, but we did have to leave the one party, and it was like, oh, but then we wanted to see the other people, and it happened to be the same date. So it's making these kinds of choices. Right?
But what a nice problem to have, right? Also to be invited to all these things. Yeah, it's wonderful.
And I think you often talk about it's okay to say no and to believe in the abundance, right? And rather than scarcity, that there will be other people, there will be a possibility, and that sort of thing.
I think that goes straight to FOMO, right? So what happens if I don't accept this invite, or if I don't go to this event? Do I believe that there will be other opportunities, that it will be out there for me in the future as well? And I think that when we really fully absorb that idea that there will be other things, it makes it more okay if we're not able to attend everything. That there's no way you're going to be able to attend everything. So you do pick and choose, but you have the awareness that yes, these other opportunities will exist. And also, if those opportunities are not coming my way, should I be the driver? Should I be the one that says, well, I haven't been to a party in a long time. Well, maybe I will be the one to take the initiative, and then see what comes of that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Or dates or whatever it might be.
Okay. So another reason people get an issue around time management is they may be overcompensating for some relationship insecurity. So this can sometimes happen when people first open an existing relationship and say your partner is out dating multiple people, or they're having multiple opportunities to date. You may feel like you have to go out and meet someone, just anyone. You might feel like if you stay home or you don't have a date, that you're going to feel jealous or insecure. And so you overcompensate for that.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that I hear there. One is the idea that I could feel as though there's an imbalance and I should be doing it as well. But the other one also is, as you rightly pointed out early on in our relationship, is, well, what are you doing when your partner has something that they have going on? Are you simply at home and absorbing that there's a void now because they've gone out? Or are you also doing something that is going to kind of be more supportive, be more nurturing, give you something to do rather than just counting the minutes until they return, right? So because it will directly impact those considerations of jealousy very often.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about those kind of strategies in our jealousy podcast, because sometimes people also, when they're new, get into this situation where they feel like if their partner's dating, they have to be on a date the same night, or trying to arrange schedules. So like Wednesday night is the night that we both go out and date. And then people get into situations where it's just not possible because you're dealing with other people's schedules and stuff. And then if you have agreed to that, it can put you in a difficult position in that all of a sudden you might say, oh, well, we're not going to go on a date. I had that personal situation happen myself. I was dating someone who had a nesting partner, and their sort of agreement was they did dates on the same night, and their partner's date backed out at the last minute. And then she was feeling very jealous. And so he felt like he had to go and support her, which I understand, but also we had plans and he was already at my place. And so that didn't feel really good.
No, I can imagine it wouldn't, but it's also interesting. It's unfortunate that their partner's dates fell through, but what else could they have done themselves to be able to say, well, no, you already have a date, go to that and I'll be okay as well.
So another thing that can come up in terms of time management and why it can become an issue is this idea of underestimating your emotional and time bandwidth. So often people forget that relationships take not only time, but also energy, right? So it's not just the time that you're out on a date. Like if you say, okay, once a week, we'll have dates with others, for example, there's still emotional processing, there's still texting, there's still checking in, there's still organizing. And then that can also expand. If you get into a really deeper relationship with someone, then there's even more of that, you know?
That's very true. Yeah. So how am I going to feel if my partner is out spending a lot of energy and then might come home a little bit depleted? And am I going to, again, simply personalize that? Or will I be able to recognize that sometimes these things happen and sometimes it'll be my turn or not? How do we go about finding a way to do that more comfortably? And what aspects of that make me feel uncomfortable? And how can we talk about that?
Yeah, sometimes, especially at the beginning, people feel like they're competing for time, and that can be a difficult thing. And because, all this arranging and stuff takes time and energy, it can look like, we're supposed to be spending time together doing our thing, like watching a movie or hanging out. But then one of us is on our phone, texting and making arrangements and checking in with our partner. And, that can impact our relationship if we're now taking time that's supposed to be quality time out to do something else. And so having agreements around these things is always important.
Yeah. And the way that we get to those agreements is by having that open dialogue about it and talking about our thoughts and feelings regarding all of those aspects of it.
What happens if somebody we're interested in appears too busy or is already busy? Do we personalize it?
Right. And do we feel, well, how is it that they're so busy with these other people, but not making time for me? And then do we simply, as I said, do we personalize that? Or do we recognize, well, that maybe our turn is coming up or it's just not going to work out? And how will we contend with it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a mindset we have to come to too. I know people do have busy lives. And if they are juggling busy work, career, and that sort of thing, and multiple relationships, it can be difficult. And we've had that experience with people we know as well.
I'm curious if you, in your dating, have been on both sides of that. One where you've been wanting to get together with somebody, but for whatever reason, it's not working out. Or the other way, where they might be trying to invite you and you're not able to. And what is it like for you to have to decline this invite?
Yeah, I do have that situation relatively often. There's people that I've wanted to meet that wanted to meet me, and I like the idea of meeting up with them. But then when it comes to my level of energy of the other things that I'm prioritizing in my life, including you, this podcast, the work I do and stuff like that, I just can't devote the energy to it. So I do feel bad about it. And sometimes I have to say, like, listen, I just don't have the energy for it. But it's hard. Like, you don't like disappointing people, and I do want to meet people. And then there's the other side of the coin that sometimes I just allow myself to not have the energy for it. And so sometimes I have to kind of say, yeah, no, like just go for a coffee or do something small or right after work and just spending a small amount of time. So there's different ways of doing it. Sometimes what happens as well in this whole managing of time and things is that people end up being overwrought, overcommitted, and then can't bring that energy back into their family, right? So they may not keep family responsibilities at times. It does happen.
But that's an interesting point to bring up also, is if I am out expending all this energy, if I am doing all these things, do I start to recognize how I might feel depleted? Am I prioritizing myself in the right ways? Am I going to do enough to be self-preserving while I'm doing all these things? And what impact might it be having? So it's rewarding and fun at one point, but everything has a cost. So what is the other side of that? And then to have that awareness, that self-reflection awareness, so that we can make informed decisions about it and really look at, well, it is immediately gratifying to do these things, but what is it, if anything, costing me on the other end of that? And how can I still maintain a balance where I feel well about it, but also it is compatible with my constellation?
So I'm smiling because sometimes I think I can do more than I really can. And if I think about just my regular life, not even relationships, it's I get up in the morning, I do my workout, I'm feeling good, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to make a really healthy meal after I finish a whole full day of coaching where I'm talking to people. And then I get to the end of the day and I'm kind of like dead, right? And so I should remember that and know that and plan for that in advance to make sure either I don't overschedule myself in my work life, or that I pre-plan meals, for example, so that it's easier on those busier days. So life and relationships, time management is important. Okay, so yes, that leads us into the importance of time management. So we kind of talked about this, but time is one of the things that is finite, and how you use it determines the health of not only your relationships, but yourself, right? And so managing multiple relationships, of course, requires more planning and thinking than perhaps monogamous relationships. But I say that with a perhaps, because I think depending on what your life circumstances is, if you're in a family with kids or have a busy career, then you're constantly making choices and that sort of thing, right? Yeah. So that's why it's important to have both structure and time, like you said, for spontaneity. You need to find the sweet spot for that. You can't overplan everything.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but
You're smiling.
I'm just thinking about that. So much of this seems to be about balance, right? So I have my children. I want to prioritize them. I want to give them space. But again, if I am in that caregiving role, for example, and I'm always giving to them, am I feeling as though I am the last one on that list? And how can I ever be recognized for my own? And then if it's not automatically coming organically, I may have to say, well, you know what? I'm needing to modify this. I need to be on that list a little bit higher up on occasion as well. So it's really a question of, do I feel comfortable asking for those things? Am I feeling okay in asking my partner, for example, could you take the kids this time because I need to have some time? And what is it like? And if it's difficult for me to ask that, I might also consider, well, what's it like for my loving, supportive partner? Is it also difficult for them to ask? Are they wanting to not impose, or do they feel selfish in asking this? So again, it is so much what we say about consideration. Is it important to me? Is it important to them? And vice versa.
Yeah, a lot of the couples I work with, this is one of the things they come up with. So now not only do they have to balance their, new relationships, but the family, and then sometimes issues that haven't been dealt with in the past, like a balance of, family responsibilities comes into play. And then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, mom or dad can't do this or that. Like, you have to share it more. And so sometimes polyamory can actually help with those things, because it brings to light some of the issues that maybe we've been ignoring for a long time. Like one person maybe feeling like they're doing more and they're not being that balance or being more responsible, that sort of thing. So let's go into practical tips for managing time in polyamory or non-monogamous relationships.
So we start with deciding what's important to you.
Yeah, I think that's the number one thing that we have to figure out is what's important to you, what's a priority for you in terms of how you spend your time. And this is going to need to accommodate work, career, family, relationships, and self. So what are those things? Because we want to make sure we're not neglecting and taking care of our life things, because that can happen, especially at the beginning when you have all that new relationship energy and excitement. You find that you're out every evening and then you're like, all of a sudden the house is a mess, there's no food in the fridge, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? I want to give an example of this, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
So I used to think, I don't know, people out there, you can tell us in the comments, I used to think that I wasn't 100% in control of my time. And actually a friend had asked me this question, do I feel like I control my time? Because I had gotten behind on my taxes. And after thinking about it for a while, I was like, oh yeah, I was realizing that I was giving up my own personal time to work, unpaid work. And as a result was leaving these things behind that were important. So I started taking back my time, I got my taxes done, and then that changed my whole life in terms of my morning routine and prioritizing self-care in the morning and exercise. Yeah.
So you found ways to integrate that. And now that taking those actions makes you feel as though you are more in control of your time?
Yeah, absolutely. I used to think that if somebody scheduled a meeting and it overlapped my lunch or something else, that I had to take it, right? But you could actually say, no, that time doesn't work for me, or I have something else, right? And I try to do that and be aware when I'm working with other people, not to overcommit them as well. So I think in figuring out what's right for you, you have to also figure out what you need for self-care and downtime. I know we said that a few times, but making a plan for that and when that works in your life. So another practical tip is, and you mentioned it at the beginning, is using tools. So like shared calendars and scheduling. So if you have a hard time balancing things and you have your calendar and I have my calendar and your partner has a calendar, my partner has a calendar, it can be difficult. So sometimes people use tools like Google Calendar, Apple iCloud, Family Wall, those sorts of things, and create a shared calendar that maybe is color-coded, that everybody can see and look at and add things to.
It's interesting because I remember early on when someone first said, well, maybe we should put it on the calendar, I thought they were being sarcastic. I thought it was a joke. And then I came to find out, actually, no, it's very useful. And now I can't imagine not having it on the calendar.
Yeah. I think at one point we had a paper calendar because we decided we didn't want to do electronic calendar anymore. So we had a paper calendar of all things. But what we tend to do is create a block of time and then invite the other person rather than having, like, we don't use a shared calendar ourselves. It hasn't been necessary. But I suppose if you have more of a polycule, multiple situation where there's multiple partners and people are open to it, it's something that you can use.
Right. Well, also the paper calendar is wonderful if you are in close physical proximity, but if you are in different cities, for example, or even in the same town, but apart from each other, wanting to share it with multiple people, maybe the paper doesn't work so well. So the electronic calendar might be a good.
Okay. So another thing to do is figure out what's important to you and use tools, and then communicating in advance and ongoing. We always say communication, but in terms of scheduling and time, it becomes super important. And that also includes setting expectations with partners about your availability and your desires. So if I meet someone new, myself personally, I know that I don't have a lot of time for dates. So, probably good idea to disclose that to someone like, hey, like I might be able to see you once a month. Is that okay? You know what I mean?
Well, I think I'm seeing that more and more in dating profiles where people will say, I'm not looking for an anchor partner. I'm not looking for a full-time partner, or I am. And that will inform us. And then we can say, well, that's what I'm looking for. Or, no, that would not work for me. But also in the advanced planning, I think that the bigger the event, like a party, for example, or an outing, the more time we're able to give to ourselves and to the invitees, the greater likelihood of success, right? So it's wonderful to be spontaneous, but if you think you're going to have a big party with 1 day's notice, it's probably not as likely as though you gave them like a 3-week notice and people can start planning for that. So are you setting yourself up for disappointment or success?
Yeah. And one of the components of our values-based relationship, one of the values is around consideration. And so that also relates to communicating in advance. We always had an agreement that when we made dates with others, that we would let the other person know. We have a 2-day. Now we're like, as much notice as possible. If something comes up last minute, then don't say no for sure. Just make sure we don't already have something scheduled, because we do forget things.
And for any people with issue with authority, like me, for example, where I might not like the idea of like asking, is it okay if I go out? We might say something to the effect, well, do we have anything planned for that day? I was thinking about doing this. Yeah.
And that's how we do it. In our relationship, we do not permission dating. We inform and check and make sure there's not something we've forgotten.
Right. We're considerate of the other person first, right? So we check in a little awareness of it.
Yeah. So it's important also in communicating in advance and finding out things is not making an assumption that your partner knows what you want or that you know what they want in terms of the amount of time they want to spend together. So that gets back to communicating and checking in about important events, not assuming people know your schedule, and also communicating when things aren't working. Like if you are feeling overscheduled or it's too much or that sort of thing, because that can happen. And, you may think you could, like me and my whole meal prep thing, you may think you have energy for it, but you don't. Or you maybe say, oh yeah, it's okay if my partner goes out 2 days a week. And then you figure out, oh, maybe it's actually not.
What about when there's a certain, not only imbalance of maybe available time, but drive or desire? So maybe I really like going to parties and clubs and dates like that. and I would like you to come with me. But what if you're not quite feeling at that same level or have that availability and time at your disposal? How would we navigate that or negotiate that?
What would you suggest?
Well, again, it's going to come to this very basic idea of communicating our desires and managing our expectations and finding out from the other person, is this what you're wanting? Is this realistic? Or is it working well for you or less well for you? But again, it's only really going to come out in our ability to speak openly and honestly about what we're wanting and managing those expectations.
And that could be part of that, talking about that. And it could be part of your regular relationship review that you should be having. And we recommend people have these values-based agreements and relationship reviews so that you're not just leaving things to go until they get to a state where you're really not happy.
Right. Well, that goes right back to the scheduling idea, right? So we do purposely set out to have these relationship reviews as if we're running a small business. And we say, well, we're going to set down, and even if things are working well, we'll talk about that. But it's also the already scheduled invite to talk about things that might not be as easy to bring up or that we feel need to be brought up. Yeah.
So one of the other practical tips, and we touched on this as well, is avoiding polysaturation. So you may have seen this in people's profiles, or when you meet people, they say, oh, I'm polysaturated. So the polysaturated is essentially when you have more relationships than you can handle.
So not trans fats.
Not trans fat.
No.
No.
So what happens? People, they go into this buffet, this opportunity that is abundant, and they want to grab all of this, and suddenly
it's too much. It's too much. And maybe you don't recognize it at once, but you may recognize it by feeling exhausted. You may feel resentment. You may feel overwhelmed. You may feel like you're always canceling things. That's a common thing. And needing to know when to say no to new connections. If you're not very good at saying no, or you're saying yes because you think you should, you might be polysaturated.
That's one possibility, yes.
What were you going to say?
Well, it also, if you're having a hard time saying no, it may also be an indication of being codependent or what we call people pleasing.
Yes.
That I imagine that if I'm going to say no, it is going to be a downer for you. So I will say yes, but it's not really working for me. And again, that's not really being true to ourselves. It's not really announcing how we feel about this. And would it be okay to say no?
What do you think? Is it better to say yes and then cancel if you're not feeling it, or to say no and from the start?
That's such a great question. What would prompt me to say yes if I wasn't feeling it?
Thinking that you might feel like it, or like codependence, or feeling like you started chatting with this person, so you have to go on a first date within the first week or 2 weeks or whatever, like any of those things, right?
I don't like the idea of feeling as though I should have to just for the other person, but I do like the idea of being aware that I might initially feel overwhelmed or feel some resistance to it. But if I say yes, it is an invitation to a bigger experience of the universe. And then if I'm still not really feeling it, I might identify where these feelings coming from and then say, you know what, at the end of the day, it's not for me. Or at the end of the day, maybe I'm feeling a little resistant, but I'll go with an open mind, open heart and see what it goes. And then perhaps I'll be pleasantly surprised. Or if it really does go south, I'll say, well, next time, maybe I will say what is really feeling, driving my feelings. And so I could be more self-advocating.
And if you have said yes, do you feel more obliged not to cancel?
No, I think I should feel that I'm able to reserve the right to cancel. At the end of the day, if I'm not feeling it, then I'm going to resist saying yes just for the other person.
For sure. I think that's a better strategy, because I notice people in the group have said this as well, that people are canceling a lot and are a bit flaky. I've noticed people will say yes and then cancel. And I don't like last minute canceling. It annoys me sometimes. If you really are unsure, then say no, or say, you know what, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel on Wednesday. Are you okay if we make tentative plans and then keep in touch?
That's a great point. But I also wonder if there is sort of a curve to it. When we are first meeting people, chatting online, which we've never met, there's, I think, generally a very low level of emotional investment at that point.
Yes.
So it does seem to be rather more common. But yes, if you have a long-standing relationship with somebody and you are rather invested in them emotionally and they're still canceling like this, then maybe it's indicative of something else that's going on.
So another tip is, of course, to prioritize quality time with all your partners. So if you have long-term partners, and I think the trouble people sometimes get into especially when they first start, is that they always assume their partner is always there, especially if you're nesting, and they assume that means that's quality time, but it's not. Just because someone's physically present doesn't mean that you're giving them quality time. So making sure that you're intentional about spending time with long-term partners, nesting partners, even if it's well established.
And spending that time together doesn't have to be this huge amount of dedication to it. In fact, you and I we learned this practice early on of how we're able to connect in a moment simply by alerting the other person. So it happened the other night. We were busy getting ready to do something, and I wanted to connect, and I tried to be present in your gaze, and you were there for a moment, but then you were about to leave because understandably there was a lot to do. And I said, no, Tara, I need to connect with you. Because we had already talked about this, because we had already done that, we were familiar with it, but then you recognize, oh, this is a little bit different. He's needing me to be here for the moment. And then you're able to suspend those things and be there for the moment, which is a luxury, but I appreciate the fact that you were able to do that. Yeah. But I was able to ask you, I was able to inform you, I need to connect. And then after that, I felt as though we had connected. I felt more secure. I felt grounded in that way. And then we could go about and do our thing. So maybe it doesn't have to have this grand demonstration or this huge chunk of time to do it. There are ways of connecting, but it's most important that we do feel that connection, that we do feel as though we are being recognized, that the other person is present with us. And we try to do that for the other person as well.
Yeah, I love that you do that. And you also do that when you feel like my anxiety level is going up. Because when I get busy doing stuff, I do get that kind of anxious hustle feeling, and I don't like it. And you're very good at kind of bringing me back down, inviting me to breathe, and doing our little hand on the heart thing, which is awesome. So thank you for that. Yeah. So you can be those small moments, or you can do like date nights. And
grand gestures are also welcome too, right? It's beautiful when somebody has taken the initiative and said, hey, you know what? I've taken care of all these considerations. I invite you to come with me for this thing. And then it can speak volumes as well.
Another thing that works that I've suggested to clients is to make sure you're planning in advance, planning things in the future too. So there's stuff to look forward to. And that kind of helps too when there's a new partner and there's new relationship energy. So a couple that I worked with, because of his partner being far away, he would go away for overnight. And she was having a bit of difficulty navigating that. And so what they did is they planned a date before that and time after. So they sort of sandwiched the time. So when he was away with his partner overnight, she always made something to do, but also had something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's interesting that you speak about that, because it makes me think of somebody I was speaking to the other day who is solo poly, and they were aware that they might often feel that the people that they're wanting to date are coupled. And if they don't set up time to meet with whoever it is they're dating, that they can feel kind of isolated or alone. Whereas the person who is, say, for example, nesting, even if they don't have something planned, they already have a partner nesting with them. Right. So it doesn't fall upon them in the same way. It doesn't have that same weighted feeling. Some people enjoy being alone, but some people might want to connect. They get to go there and their partners are already saturated, they're already accounted for, and then do they feel as though they're kind of being left out or lonely, isolated, whatever it might be. Yeah. So if you are sole poly, maybe it's not necessarily fair, but it might fall upon you to have to be a little bit more proactive in setting up these things.
Yeah, and also being aware of the person who you're with, what their time is going to be like. If they're not going to give you the time that you want, or the connection or the emotional things that you need, that's a good thing to know. So another thing that people do, and this is not for everybody, is to spend time with the metamors. So this was suggested in an article on the More Than Two website. More Than Two is a common book people have read about non-monogamy. And basically what the suggestion was, and what they do, is they group people together. So if we're together, we would invite your partner, my partner, to go out together. So you're spending all time together, and you might even incorporate families and that sort of thing as well. It's an option. It's a form of kitchen table polyamory that works for some people, but not for everybody. But it can be an option, and people might love that.
So, something to consider. But again, it is, there's so many different shades, there's so many different flavors to how we relate, that maybe not all of them are for you, and we pick which ones work best for us.
Yeah, like someone I work with, what they've done is they've created like a sort of family day, and they all get together with the kids and spend time together, like watching football or having a meal together and that sort of thing. And they like that connection, but that's a very specific time, but they make sure they also have time with all their partners. So then finally, our not to do list for time management. And so we talked about a lot of these things, but I think it's important to repeat again that it's important to avoid overcommitment and not schedule every single moment of the day.
And if you happen to, you have to pass that up and you don't accept all those invitations, knowing that there will be future opportunities. And if there aren't, then you'll create them.
Right. So another not to do is neglecting self-care. So burnout affects all your relationships, including your relationship with self. Another not to do is forgetting to reevaluate. So often people will make a decision at one point in time and not then reflect on their needs, that your needs and priorities may shift over time, because it does happen.
It does.
Another not to do, assuming fairness equals equality. And that's in a lot of things, right? So it's important to balance time in a way that feels good to everyone, but not so rigid in equal blocks. Like you get one night, you get one night, you get one night, or I do 10 texts with you, or whatever it is. Like equal and fair are different, and people will have a different idea.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too, because a lot of male-female relationships, when they open it up, it seems as though that there's not always this balance that we're going to have the same amount of likes or hits or invites, and there may be that imbalance. And how are we going to be able to negotiate that? Are we going to be able to navigate that successfully, or are we going to again find the negation of it, the deficit of it, and think, oh, woe is me? Because there will not be this balance. I mean, it seems almost impossible that it's going to be 50 likes for you and 50 likes for me. It's just
and yet I think people think that when they open up a relationship that it is going to be like that, but it really isn't. And it can cause some issues when one partner's getting more attention than the other or getting more opportunities.
Yeah, and it goes both ways, right? Because there's times when you're getting a lot or times when I'm getting a lot, but it's the idea that we would have the awareness of this thing before it happens. And we even talk about it with our partners. So how are you going to feel if I'm getting all this attention? And what's it going to be like for you? And how can we support you? How can we make you feel as though you're still important and wanted?
And the other thing that I think related to that is the types of connections we want. One person may want different connections. Like one person in opening up might just want casual sexual partners that they see from time to time, and maybe they want more of them. Whereas one person may want maybe just one other partner that they have a more stronger emotional commitment with. And so sometimes that can cause things as well, because they might want different things. And it can also cause jealousy if one person is getting really, really close to somebody, even if it's just one person.
Yeah. But getting all that attention from somebody might not necessarily be the attention that you're wanting to get. It's not that those type of offerings or dates, right?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm glad we did this.
So
just a little bit of a wrap up. So a reminder of a few key points today. So managing time and relationships is important, obviously. Avoiding overscheduling, making sure you're prioritizing rest, downtime, and time for spontaneity so you don't overcommit or have burnout. Use tools where appropriate to share calendars or to allow everyone to know the schedule, figure out those things. And remember, it's always okay to adjust and fine tune your approach over time. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, awesome. So we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. Share your time management tips in the comments of this episode and in our Let's Talk Polyamory community. We'll make sure we put a link in the show notes.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for listening, and have a great day.
If you want to have secure, satisfying, and sexy relationships, check out our Poly Newbies digital course. It's 7 modules of all you need in one place. And as a thank you to our listeners, we're offering it at an inclusive price. Link is in the show notes, plus all the other awesome things we talked about today. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast with TNA. Don't forget to subscribe and give us some love on your favorite podcasting platform. You can check out the show notes for any of the links to the courses or information we talked about today. Thanks, and have a fantastic and sexy day.